The narrator said in a serious tone, "This is not the story of a single house. This is the story of a society where girls are deprived of their childhood before their age, where a father's decisions are never questioned, where silence is called respect and endurance is called sacrifice, and where an innocent girl is slowly buried alive while still breathing." The narrator added, "Before watching this story, remember this, there is no single villain here. Here, every silent person is an accomplice." The story begins. Maru ran happily and said, "Father, Father, you're back." Her father replied with a smile, "Yes, my child, I'm back. Look what I've brought for you." Maru clapped with joy and said, "Bangles. Did you bring my bangles?" Her father said lovingly, "Yes, of course. Your bangles. But first, come inside." Her aunt interrupted sarcastically, "She hasn't even arrived yet, and the demands have already started." Maru said in a lowered voice, "I only asked." Her father glared at the aunt and said, "She's just a child. Let her be happy." The aunt snorted and said, "Even happiness should have limits." Maru fell silent. After some time, her father said in a strict tone, "Maru, how many times have I told you not to play outside in the evening?" Maru replied in confusion, "Father, you tell me not to play in the afternoon, then you say not to play in the evening either. When am I supposed to play?" The aunt said angrily. "See how much she talks?" Her father said angrily, "Enough. Don't talk so much." With tears in her eyes, Maru said, "We daughters have no time of our own. No time to play. No time to laugh." Gathering courage, Maru said, "Father, please enroll me in school." Her father became silent. Changing the topic, "Dian Saif, come on, wash your hands and face. Change your clothes. There is housework to do." That night, her father said in a worried tone, "People in the neighborhood were talking today." The aunt immediately said, "People will talk. She's a girl." Her father said in a tired voice, "Hamida has gone to her own home now. Who will take care of Maru?" The aunt said meaningfully, "There is only one solution." Her father asked in shock, "What?" The aunt said clearly, "A proposal." A few moments of silence. Her father said softly, "She is still very young." The aunt said bitterly, "Young girls grow up early." The next day, Maru asked innocently, "Father, can I go out to play today?" Her father replied hesitantly, "No, not today." Maru said softly, "Yesterday wasn't allowed either." Her father said firmly, "Enough. The matter is over." Maru quietly went inside. The narrator said, "This silence was not a coincidence. It was the silence that spreads before an approaching storm." The narrator said, "Some decisions are not made in a single day. They are slowly cooked within hearts, and when they finally reach the tongue, they have already become destiny." The next morning, the aunt said in a sharp voice, "Maru, get up. The sun is already high." Maru said while rubbing her eyes, "I was still sleeping." The aunt said sarcastically, "You didn't come here to sleep. You came to work." Maru quietly got up. In the kitchen, the aunt said while banging the utensils, "Make tea, and be careful. Don't make it like yesterday." Maru said fearfully, "Yes." The tea began to boil. The aunt said while watching closely, "There's too much sugar." Maru immediately said, "I'll fix it." The aunt said harshly, "You always have to fix things later." At the same time, Iqbal called out from outside, "Is breakfast ready or not?" The aunt turned and said, "It's almost done." Iqbal looked at Maru and said, "It's necessary to teach a girl household work. It will be useful in her in-laws' home tomorrow." Maru lowered her head. In the afternoon, gathering courage, Maru asked, "Aunt, may I go outside to play for a little while?" The aunt said angrily, "Play? Is this the age for you to play? Maru said softly. All the children are playing, the aunt said sarcastically. They are children. You are a girl. Maru's lips trembled, but she did not say anything. In the evening, father returned from work. Maru ran toward him and said, "Father," looking at her, he said. "What happened? Why are your eyes swollen?" Maru immediately said, "Nothing." The aunt interrupted. "It's the burden of work. She's not used to it yet." Father looked at Maru, but said nothing. At night, father said softly to the aunt, "I met Imam Sheen today." The aunt immediately asked, "What was he saying?" Father said quietly, "He was saying that the girl is growing up." The aunt said meaningfully, "There is only one way to silence people's tongues." Father asked, "Which one?" The aunt said clearly, "Marriage." Silence filled the room. Father took a deep breath and said, "So soon?" The aunt said bitterly. "Soon. If talk spreads tomorrow, you will be the one who feels ashamed." That same night, Maru came to her sister and said, "Why did you leave me and go away?" The sister said sadly, "I was helpless." Maru cried and said, "Aunt does not treat me well." The sister said softly, "I know." Maru asked, "Why doesn't father listen to me?" The sister fell silent. The next day, while talking to the neighbor, the aunt sighed, "The girl needs to be controlled now." The neighbor asked curiously, "Why? Is something wrong?" The aunt said with a meaningful smile, "The time has come." Maru was listening to everything from behind the door. She thought to herself. "The time for what?" the narrator said. These were the moments when questions hung in the air and the answers had already passed into other hands. Some things are first born in the heart, then they come to the tongue, and finally, they spread through the streets. This was the stage when Maru's story stepped out of her home and began to turn into the talk of the entire neighborhood. That same morning, while children were playing in the street, one boy, bouncing the ball, said, "Maru, come, let's play." Another boy immediately said, "No, she won't play with us anymore." The first boy asked in surprise, "Why?" The second boy, imitating the elders, said, "Mother says she has grown up now." Maru stood a few steps away, hearing everything. She said nothing, only lowered her gaze. A little while later, in one of the neighborhood houses, women were sitting and talking. One woman said in a low voice, "Have you heard about that girl, the one who doesn't have a mother?" Another woman replied immediately, Yes, her. Her age is passing now." A third woman nodded and said, "Girls like her have no one. May God keep things safe." The first woman said meaningfully, "Just don't let it get too late." At the same time, near the shop at the street corner, men were sitting. One man said, while setting down his hookah, "Times are not like they used to be." Another said seriously, "Especially when there is a girl growing up in the house." The third man added, "And that, too, without a mother." An elderly man cleared his throat and said, "Such a trust is not kept for long." That same day, while returning from the mosque, Imam Din said as they walked together, "Talk spreads quickly." The man in front asked, "Then what should be done?" Imam Sheen replied after careful thought, "People choose the path that society is willing to tolerate." Meanwhile, at home, Maru came and sat beside her sister in a corner. Maru asked in a soft voice, "Why do people look at me like this?" Her sister said quietly, "They are not looking at you. They are looking at their own thinking." Maru asked, "Did I do something wrong?" Her sister had no answer. That same evening, as the sun began to set, Iqbal sat beside father and said, "People in the neighborhood are talking." Father asked, startled, "About what?" Iqbal avoided his eyes and said, "About your daughter." Father said angrily, "They point fingers at my daughter." Iqbal replied carefully, "Not fingers, tongues." At the same time, the aunt was speaking to a neighbor in another house. The aunt said, "I've been saying it for a while now. Things are crossing the limit." The neighbor asked, "Then what?" the aunt said in a low voice. Everyone knows the solution. Night had grown deep. Meru was standing on the rooftop, looking up at the sky. She said to herself, "Mother, if I really have grown up, then why am I so afraid?" The narrator said, "This was the time when talk about a little girl was on every street, in every house, and on every tongue. But no one asked that girl anything at all." The narrator said, "When talk becomes too much, it does not remain just words. It turns into pressure, and pressure eventually gives birth to a decision." The next morning, when the women of the neighborhood gathered to fetch water, one woman said while placing her pots, "I saw that girl alone again yesterday." Another woman immediately said, "Yes, I saw her too." People have started pointing fingers now. A third woman shook her head and said, "No one is really at fault. Times are just like this." At the same time, nearby in a courtyard, the aunt said in a low voice to a neighbor, "I have explained everything to father." The neighbor asked, "Did he agree?" The aunt said quietly, "His heart did not agree, but circumstances force agreement." That some day, a gathering of men had formed near the shop. One man said, "The matter has not remained limited to the street anymore." Another replied, "Yes, even distant relatives have started asking." Another man said, "It becomes difficult for a girl's father." That evening, when father returned from work, his face looked tired. Iqbal said softly, "I met Imam Shin again today." Father asked it. What was he saying? Iqbal said carefully, "He was saying people talk, and talk does not stop." Father said nothing. Inside the house, Meru was sitting beside her sister. Meru said softly, "Do you think I really have grown up?" Her sister took a breath before answering, "You haven't grown up. People have just started seeing you as grown." Meru asked, "Is it because of me?" Her sister immediately said, "No." That same night, the aunt sat beside father and said, "The aunt said the longer you wait, the more the talk will grow." Father said restlessly, "She is still a child," the aunt said slowly. "The world does not see a child. The world sees opportunity." At that very moment, in some other house, far away, a relative said on the phone, "We are Berud," that a proposal is being discussed for your daughter. Father said in Shakwa side, "Tat." A voice replied from the other side, "People." Father hung up the phone. In the final hours of the night, Meru lay awake on the charpoy. She said to herself, "Everyone is talking about me, but no one talks to me." The narrator said, "This was the moment when the decision had not yet been spoken, but everywhere, its noise had already begun to be heard." The narrator said, "When talk crosses its limits, even silence becomes a burden. And then one day the words are spoken that everyone has been afraid of." The next morning, there was a strange silence in the neighborhood. People were greeting each other, but their eyes kept drifting again and again toward the same house. At the same time, in a nearby house, women were sitting and talking. One woman said, "By now, a decision should have been made." Another woman replied, "A father has a heart, but people do not look at hearts." A third woman said softly, "Delay is not good." Meanwhile, at the men's gathering near the shop, the discussion was heated. One man said, "People have started asking directly now." Another said, "When tongues start moving, honor comes into danger." An elderly man said seriously, "A father has to make a hard decision." That same day in the afternoon, father returned early from work. As soon as he entered the house, his face showed that his heart was heavy. The aunt said as soon as she saw him, "You're back early today." Father replied softly, "Yes." After some time, father asked everyone to sit together. Meru was sitting in a corner, her hands clasped together. Father cleared his throat and said, "People are talking." The aunt immediately said, "I've been saying this for a long time." Iqbal said in a low voice, "The talk is not going to stop." Father remained silent for a few moments and then said, Father said, "I've made a decision." Silence fell over the room. At that moment, the sister asked anxiously. The sister said, "What kind of decision?" Father lowered his eyes. Father said softly, but clearly, I'm going to finalize the proposal for Maru's marriage. Maru's hands began to tremble. Maru said in a shaking voice, "Father." Father looked at her but said nothing. The aunt immediately said. The aunt sighed. "This is for the best. Things have crossed the limit now," the sister said with anger and pain. "She is still a child," the aunt replied bitterly. "The world does not accept children." At that moment Maru gathered her courage and said, Maru said, while crying, "What wrong have I done?" No one had an answer. Father said in a heavy voice. Father said, "You have done nothing wrong. These are the circumstances." Maru said through sobs, "Then why am I the one being punished?" Father looked away. That same night, some distance away from the house, a relative said on the phone, "We are ready. You just need to say yes." Father said in a tired voice, "Give me one day." The call ended. That night, Maru was sitting on the rooftop, looking at the sky. She said to herself, "Mother, if this decision is made, where will I go?" The narrator said, "This was the moment when talk was no longer just talk. The decision had reached the tongue, and the path back began to disappear into the fog. When a decision leaves the tongue, the air of the house changes. Words become fewer and work becomes greater. And in the name of preparation, people begin to gather up their emotions." The next morning, there was the usual movement in the neighborhood, but in one house, the silence was unusual. That same morning, in the courtyard, the aunt said loudly, "From today onward, no time will be wasted. There is a lot to do." Maru asked in a low voice, "What has to be done?" The aunt replied harshly, "You already know everything." Maru lowered her head. After a while, the neighbor entered and spoke. The neighbor said, "I've heard the matter has been finalized," the aunt said with a faint smile. "Yes, God's will." The neighbor glanced at Miru and said, "The girl looks weak," the aunt immediately said. "It's a new life. Everything will be fine." At the same time, at the corner of the street, a few women were whispering among themselves. One woman said, "So soon," another replied. There was pressure from people. The third said with sadness, "She's still a child." That same day in the afternoon, Father stopped near the shop. An acquaintance said, "Brother, has the decision been made?" Father replied briefly, "Yes." The man said, "It's difficult, but sometimes this is what has to be done." Father said nothing. That same evening, inside the house, Mary was sitting beside the clothes that the aunt was taking out and setting aside. Mary asked softly, "Are all these for me?" The aunt said carelessly, "Yes. This is your world now." Maru said in a trembling voice, "Will I be able to come back?" The aunt replied immediately, "Don't think about such things." At that moment, her sister came and sat beside her. The sister said softly, "Are you scared?" Maru nodded and said, "Very much." The sister said with tearful eyes, "I am here." That night, Father was sitting alone. He said to himself, "Am I doing the right thing?" From outside the room, the aunt's voice was heard. The aunt said, "This is not the time to step back." Father remained silent. That same night, in another house in the neighborhood, a relative said on the phone, "Everything is ready from our side." From the other end, someone said, "Just tell us the date." On the rooftop of the house, late at night, Maru was looking at the sky. She said to herself, "If this is my new life, then where will my old life go?" The narrator said, "This preparation was not only for a wedding. It was the preparation to separate a child from her childhood, and in all this noise, no one was listening to her silence. When a wedding draws near, it does not bring only happiness into a house. Relatives also arrive, and every relative brings an opinion along. The morning had not fully brightened when Aunt Razia was the first to arrive at the door. As soon as she entered, Aunt Razia said, "Oh my God, to see this day too. Maru's wedding," the aunt said with a forced smile. "Just pray that everything goes well." Aunt Razia looked around and said, "Where is the girl?" Maru was sitting in a corner of the room. Seeing her, Aunt Razia said, "Oh child, why does your face look so dull?" Maru said in a low voice. It's nothing. Aunt Razia nodded and said, all girls are like this. After a while, Aunt Zahida arrived, along with Aunt Shami. Aunt Zahida said to the aunt, have you estimated the expenses? The aunt replied immediately. Somehow, Aunt Shamim added, when it's a matter of honor, accounts are settled later. At the same time, men began gathering outside the courtyard. Uncle Karim sat down and said, how many people will be in the wedding procession? Uncle Salim replied, they're saying around 50. Iqbal said worriedly, that much expense is not easy. Uncle Karim shrugged and said, she is a daughter. It has to be done. Father was listening to everything, but he did not speak. Inside the house, the women's gathering settled in. Aunt Nasreen took out the henna and said, come, seat Maru first. The neighbor Shakila said, her hands are a bit cold. Aunt Zahida held Maru's hand and said, are you scared? Maru lowered her gaze and said, yes. And Shamim laughed and said, everyone feels afraid. After marriage, everything becomes fine. While applying the henna, Aunt Nasreen said, don't cry, or the color won't come out well. The neighbor Shakila immediately said, in-laws don't like to see a weak girl. Aunt Razia cut in. She's not a child anymore. Now she must become strong. Maru closed her eyes. At that moment, her sister quietly came and sat beside her. Her sister whispered, if your heart feels overwhelmed, look toward me. Maru asked softly, will you come with me? Her sister said with difficulty, as far as I can. Maru understood that answer. In the evening, when the women fell quiet for a while, Aunt Razia said to father, brother, the decision is difficult, but there is also fear of the world. Father said in a tired voice, I cannot sleep. Aunt Zahida said, with time, everything becomes fine. Father looked away. At night, when most people had left, Maru was sitting alone on the charpoy. She said to herself, so many people were here, so many words were spoken, but no one asked what I wanted. The narrator said, this was the day when relatives were gathered. The house was full, but a little girl, for the first time, felt completely alone. Some days pass in noise, and some days change the direction of life. This was the day everyone was calling blessed, but a little girl was silently afraid of it. Early in the morning, activity had already begun in the street. Chairs were being placed outside the doors. Someone carried a cooking pot. Someone carried a sheet. Uncle Salim arrived first. Shaking hands with father, Uncle Salim said, may God keep things good. Today's a big day. Father replied in a low voice, yes. Uncle Salim paused and asked, is everything ready? Father answered briefly, yes. A little later, Uncle Karim came inside. Uncle Karim said loudly, has the Qazi arrived or not? Iqbal replied, he's on the way. Uncle Karim nodded and said, all right, too much delay isn't good. Inside the house, the noise of women was increasing. Aunt Razia said, get Maru ready. The Qazi is coming. Aunt Zahida immediately said, put the jewelry on her. People will be watching. And Shamim added, a quiet bride looks good. Maru was sitting in one room. Women were all around her, yet she felt separate from everyone. The neighbor Shakila, while fixing her hair, said, keep your eyes down. That's the way. Maru asked softly, what will happen to me? The neighbor Shakila said in surprise, everything will be fine. This was the sentence everyone said, and the same sentence no one had proof for. At that moment, her sister entered the room. Her sister held Maru's hand and said, I'm right here. Maru said in a trembling voice, what if I don't want this? Her sister fell silent. With tears in her eyes, her sister said, I wish I could do something. Outside, in the men's gathering, the Qazi said as he sat down, are the marriage papers ready? Uncle Karim immediately said, yes, everything is ready. The Qazi looked at father and asked, are you the father? Father lowered his head and said, yes. In a formal tone, Takazi sighed. Takazi said, "The girl's consent is necessary." For a moment, silence spread through the room. Uncle Karim quickly said, "The family agrees." Uncle Salim added to manage the situation. "The girl is shy." Maru was cold. She walked forward slowly. Each step felt heavy upon her. Takazi asked gently, "Daughter, do you consent to this marriage?" Maru's lips began to tremble. She looked around the aunts, the neighbors, and on one side, Father, whose eyes were fixed on the ground. Miru said in a very soft voice, "Father." Father did not raise his head. Takazi asked again, "Daughter?" Someone in the room cleared their throat, and Shamim whispered, "Say yes," Aunt Razia said. "It's a ritual." Maru closed her eyes. In a broken voice, Maru said, "Yes." That yes was not of happiness. It was a surrender. Takazi sighed. "The marriage is complete." Noise erupted outside. Someone said, "Congratulations." Someone said, "Distribute sweets." Inside the house, Maru stood there. She said to herself, "Was this really my consent?" The narrator said, "This was the day when the crowd was happy. The relatives were satisfied, and a little girl legally became someone else's, but no longer remained her own. After the marriage, the house fills up again, but within that fullness, something becomes empty. This was the moment everyone calls the farewell, and a little girl is left behind forever." As morning broke, the sounds of cars began to fill the street. People started gathering outside the door, some alooing, some reminding each other of rituals. Uncle Karim called out first. Uncle Karim said, "Is the car ready?" Iqbal replied, "Yes, just a few minutes." Uncle Salim looked around and said, "Bring the bride out. Too much delay isn't good." Inside the house, a crowd of women surrounded Maru. Aunt Razia said in a crying voice, "May God grant good fortune." Aunt Zahida wiped her tears and said, "All girls leave like this." Aunt Shamim said hurriedly, "Don't keep tears in your eyes. People are watching." Maru sat with her head lowered. The neighbor Shakila placed the Quran in her hands and said, "Hold this. Everything will become easier." Maru asked in a soft voice, "Will I be able to come back?" The neighbor Shakila had no answer. At that moment her sister stepped forward. Her sister hugged Maru and said, "Stay strong," Maru asked through sobs. "When will I see you?" Her sister looked away and said, "Soon." That soon had no date. Father was standing at a distance. His hands were trembling, his eyes filling again and again. Uncle Karim said to Father, "Brother, now make your heart strong." Father said softly, "I have made myself strong. That is why I am able to do this." The aunt stepped forward and said, "Come on, it's time." Maru was lifted up. Her steps were unsteady. At the doorway, Maru looked back for a moment. The same courtyard, the same walls, the same door where she had spent her childhood. Maru said softly, "Father." Father raised his head. Maru said in a choked voice, "What wrong had I done?" Father's lips moved, but no sound came out. Uncle Salim said gently, "That's enough, child. Now you must go." Maru was seated in the car. The car started moving. Aunt Razia cried and said, "May God protect her." Auntie Zahida said, "Now, she has become someone else's." Inside the car, Maru sat silently. She said to herself, "My home has been left behind, and I am going forward to a place where no one knows me." At the door of the house, Father stood alone. Iqbal said softly, "Come inside." Father kept his eyes fixed on the departing car and said, "Today, the house has truly become empty." The narrator said, "This farewell was not only of a little girl. It was a father's silent defeat, a sister's helplessness, and a society's victory that once again made a decision without asking anyone. After the farewell, a girl does not just change her home. She leaves behind every relationship, every voice, and every support. This was the first day when Maru realized that unfamiliarity is not just the name of a place. The car stopped in a narrow street. A few people were standing outside the door, some with smiles on their faces, some with curiosity. First, the mother-in-law, Zubaydah Begum, stepped forward. Zubaydah Begum said in a formal tone, "Come, daughter-in-law, step inside." Uncle Rashid, standing nearby, said, "Recite Bismillah." Maru stepped forward quietly. As soon as she entered, the sister-in-law Shazia whispered, "She looks very young." The other sister-in-law Fareha replied, "She'll get used to it." Maru heard everything, but said nothing. After reaching the room, Zubaydah Begum said, "This is your room," Maru said in a low voice. "Yes." The mother-in-law immediately said, "There is no need to talk much. Work speaks here." At that moment, her husband, Asif, stopped at the door of the room. Asif said briefly. Ami Zubaydah Begum turned and said, "Yes. Leave the bride now. Everyone is tired." Asif looked at Maru, but did not say anything. After a while, a voice came from the kitchen. The mother-in-law said, "Do you know how to make tea?" Maru said nervously, "I can try." The sister-in-law Shazia said sarcastically, "There is no trying here. We need work." In the evening, some relatives came to visit. Auntie Nahid said, "The daughter-in-law is very quiet." The mother-in-law replied, "Quiet girls learn quickly." Uncle Anwar laughed and said, "Now she belongs to this house." Maru lowered her gaze. Night began to fall. There was dim light in the room. Asif sat down and said, "Emmy is strict. Don't take it badly." Maru said softly, "Yes." Asif added, "Everyone has to adjust here." Maru nodded. After a while, the mother-in-law said from the doorway, "No more talking. There's a lot of work tomorrow." Asif left the room. Alone in the room, Maru was sitting on the bed. She said to herself, "Mother, no one here knows me, and I do not know how I will live here." The narrator said, this was only the first day, but Miru had already understood that this house was not hers, and that her silence was going to be the loudest thing here. When the first day passes in a new house, real life begins, where welcomes end and responsibilities begin. At the time of Fajr in the morning, the sound of utensils began echoing through the house. From the kitchen, the voice of the mother-in-law Zubaydah Begum was heard. Zubaydah Begum said, "Daughter-in-law, are you sleeping?" "This is not the place for sleeping." Maru woke up in a panic. Maru said nervously, "Yes, I'm coming." As soon as she entered the kitchen, the sister-in-law Shazia said without looking, "The tea is late." Maru immediately said, "I'll make it right now." The other sister-in-law Fariha said sarcastically, "Ami, she already looks tired." Zubaydah Begum said sternly, "She will have to get used to it. There are no pampering ways here." After the tea, the mother-in-law said, "Knead the dough and wash the dishes as well." Maru said softly, "Yes." Her hands were trembling, but she did not say anything. At the same time, outside in the courtyard, Aunt Nahid had come. Aunt Nahid said, "The daughter-in-law looks like a working one." Zubaydah Begum replied, "She is quiet, but she will learn the work." Aunt Nahid smiled and said, "Quietness is good." Maru heard all of this and lowered her head. In the afternoon, during the meal, Asif said, "Ami, the salt is a little less." Zubaydah Begum immediately looked at Miru. "Did you hear?" Maru quickly said, "I'll fix it right away." Asif looked away. After some time, the sister-in-law, Shazia, said, "In our house, work is not shared." Maru said in a low voice, "I will learn." The sister-in-law Fariha laughed and said, There is no time to learn here. In the evening, Maru was wringing clothes in the courtyard. A neighbor, Salma, called from over the wall. "Are you the new daughter?" Maru said softly. "Yes," Salma said. "Be patient. Everyone has to be patient here." At night, exhausted, Maru was sitting on the charpoy. Asif came and said, "Are you okay?" Maru said with a faint smile. "Yes." Asif paused for a moment and said, "You have to keep Emmy happy." Maru nodded. That same night, Maru looked up at the sky. She said to herself, "Is this just the first day? Or is this going to become my life?" The narrator said, "This was the beginning of endurance, where questions are buried in the heart and answers are searched for in work, and silence slowly turns into a habit. When every day becomes the same, when orders turn into routine, and when no one even asks about exhaustion, the first crack appears in the heart." These were the days when Maru learned that even crying here has to be done alone. Morning came again in darkness. From the kitchen, the voice of the mother-in-law, Zubada Begum, was heard. Zubada Begum said, "Daughter-in-law, guests are coming today." Careful. Maru immediately said, "Yes." At the same time, the sister-in-law, Shazia, mocked her. Shazia said, "Make sure the tea isn't like last time," Miru said softly. "I will try." Fareha laughed and said, "There is no trying here. Only results matter." By afternoon, Maru cooked the curry, made the flatbreads, and while washing dishes, her hands turned red. Aunt Nahid came as a guest. After tasting, Aunt Nahid said, "The salt is fine, but the spices are less." Zubada Begum immediately said, "She is still learning." Maru lowered her gaze. After the meal, Aunt Nahid said in a low voice, "The daughter-in-law doesn't talk much." Zubaydah Begum replied, "A quiet daughter-in-law runs the house well." That sentence sank into Maru's heart. In the evening, Maru was drying clothes in the courtyard. From over the wall, the neighbor Salma's voice came. Salma said, "You look very tired every day." Maru said with a faint smile, "I'll get used to it." Salma paused and said, "Note usted to Italiano. A person breaks." Maru said nothing. At night, there was silence in the room. Putting his phone aside, Asif said, "Ami was saying you were a bit slow today." Maru immediately said, "I try," Asif said in a cold tone. "Trying is not enough." That sentence became the first crack. That same night, Miru asked softly. Maru said, "Can I ever go to my own home?" Asif said in surprise. Asif said, "That is no longer your home?" Hearing this, tears filled Maru's eyes, but she did not cry. After a while, the mother-in-law's voice came from the door. Zubaydah Begum said, "Less talking, more sleep. There is work tomorrow." The door closed. In the darkness, Maru lay on the bed. She said to herself, "If I speak, I will become the bad one, and if I stay silent, I will drift away from myself." The narrator said, "This was the moment when Maru felt something break inside her for the first time, and realized that this house would demand strength from her, not love. When the body grows tired every day, and the heart remains silent every day, one day even silence turns into a question. These were the days when Maru's body kept working, and her heart began to think. The morning had not fully brightened when Miru opened her eyes. There was pain in her hands, a strain in her back, but the call from the kitchen had already come. "The mother-in-law," Zubaydah Begum said. "Daughter-in-law, today you also have to wash clothes and prepare food for the guests," Maru said softly. "Yes." She looked at her hands, where blisters were clearly visible. In the kitchen, the sister-in-law Shazia looked and said, "What happened to your hands?" Maru said in a low voice. "Nothing," Faria said with a sarcastic smile. "Already becoming delicate." Maru said nothing. Around noon, Maru felt dizzy. She leaned against the wall. Aunt Nahid noticed and said, "Daughter-in-law, why does your face look pale?" Maru immediately said, "It's just tiredness." Zabeta Begum said sternly, "Work is what builds health." At that moment, Asif came inside. Asif said, "Amy was saying you are slow again today?" Maru said softly. Maru said, "My head feels very heavy." Asif said indifferently, "Everyone has to work." That sentence became a burden on her heart. In the evening, Maru was sitting alone in the courtyard. From beyond the wall, the neighbor Salma's voice came. Salma said, "Today you are very quiet." Maru said for the first time, "I am quiet every day." Salma fell silent. At night, there was dim light in the room. Maru lay on the bed and kept staring at the ceiling. She said to herself, "If primera fa elosik, will anyone ask about me?" That same night, from the doorway, the mother-in-law said, "Wake up early tomorrow morning. Don't sleep too much." The door closed. After a while, Maru said softly to Asif. Maru said, "I miss my father," Asif said without looking. "Now you belong to this house." Maru closed her eyes. In the darkness, Maru said to herself, "I haven't stopped speaking. My words have just run out." The narrator said, "This was the moment when exhaustion was no longer just physical. It had reached the heart, and silence was slowly turning into a rebellion.